yours. What can we learn from Moses' story to help my congregant who is overlooked for a promotion, or the elderly man or woman whose children and grandchildren ignore him or her? What can I learn from Moses to share with all the wives and husbands who find it hard to feel affectionate toward a mate who takes them for granted? Let us turn to the story of Moses, the man who dared to dream, to see what lessons it reveals. Nobel Prize winner Elie Wiesel has written in Messengers of God that Moses was the most solitary and the most powerful hero in biblical history, the man who changed the course of history by himself. After him, nothing was the same again. The teachings of Jesus and Paul in the New Testament would be unintelligible unless read against the background of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. The revelation to Muhammad at the inception of Islam assumes that the earlier revelation to Moses contained the authentic words of God. Even such secular prophets as Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud drew their passion for justice and freedom from the life and teachings of Moses. We may think that we know about Moses, if not from Sunday school classes, then perhaps from one of the movies about his life. If we do, chances are we relegate that knowledge to that dusty corner of our consciousness reserved for old Sunday school lessons, entertaining and probably edifying, but not that relevant to our daily lives. But let me give you a fuller view of him, not only the man on the mountaintop, the man to whom God spoke with unparalleled intimacy, but Moses, the human being, a man whose soaring triumphs were offset by crushing defeats in some of the things that mattered most to him, a man who came to realize the price his family paid for his successes. In the end, I trust we'll still see him as a hero to admire and learn from, maybe even more heroic, when the all-too-human qualities of longing, frustration, regret, and resiliency have been added to the portrait. Let me review his story, as told in the book of Exodus and in the narrative portions of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Jacob, third of the biblical patriarchs, son of Isaac and grandson of Abraham, moved his large family from Canaan to Egypt during one of the droughts that often afflicted that part of the world. There they were welcomed warmly in a country where Jacob's son Joseph, by a series of fortuitous events, had become an important government official and had arranged for Egypt to be the only country with abundant food during hard times. The clan of Israel, as Jacob was sometimes called, settled there and flourished. A generation or two later, there arose a new king in Egypt who knew not Joseph. Exodus chapter 1, verse 8. The reference may be to a native Egyptian pharaoh who resented the prominence of some of the non-Egyptians in his kingdom. He may have seen them as a threat to his rule and reduced them to slavery, setting them to the task of building the royal fortifications and storehouses. Before long, the pharaoh's contempt for the Hebrew slaves turned into irrational hatred. He commanded that all male Israelite babies be killed at birth, thrown into the Nile to drown. Not a good way to maintain his slave labor force, but such is the power of irrational hate. The midwives who served the Hebrew population foiled his plan by sparing the babies and lying to Pharaoh, telling him that Israelite women were like animals dropping their babies before the midwives could attend to them. Pharaoh believed their story because he needed to see the Israelites as less human than Egyptians in order to justify his treatment of them. It was into this world that Moses was born. The narrative of his early years is typical of the hero narrative. The story is typically told about a child who will grow up to be someone special. The child is born to worthy parents, either after years of childlessness or at a time of great peril. He is separated from his parents and grows up ignorant of his heritage. We hear little of his early years until he comes of age and is summoned to do great things. To save the newborn child's life, Moses' mother places him in a basket, sets him afloat in the Nile, and sends his older sister, Miriam, to watch and see what happens to him. Pharaoh's daughter, having gone down to bathe in the Nile, finds him and adopts him. Why was Pharaoh's daughter bathing in the Nile when she had a house full of servants available to draw her bath in the palace? One Talmudic sage suggests that she opposed her father's treatment of the Israelites. I picture her as an idealistic adolescent. She was going to immerse herself in the Nile to identify with the Hebrew slaves at the place of their greatest suffering, and to cleanse herself of the shame of being Pharaoh's daughter. Moses, having been adopted by Pharaoh, is raised in the palace, though the Bible tells of Pharaoh's daughter hiring Moses' own mother, whose breasts were still overflowing with milk, to be his nursemaid. In every other hero narrative I know of, from Oedipus to Harry Potter, the hero is born to noble parents and raised by peasants, with his real identity emerging years later. Only in the story of Moses is the hero born into a slave family and adopted by a king. The Bible would seem to imply that it's nobler to be a Hebrew slave than to be an Egyptian prince. The Bible passes in silence over Moses' growing up years. In one verse, he's an infant floating in the Nile. In the next, Exodus chapter 2, verse 11, he's a grown man. Now his career begins. He leaves the privileged sanctuary of Pharaoh's palace. We read in Exodus chapter 2, verse 11, "When Moses had grown up, he went out to his brethren and witnessed their labors. He saw an Egyptian man beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen." Did Moses know that he himself was a Hebrew, protected from the fate of the other Israelites because he was Pharaoh's adopted grandson? Or is it only the narrator of the story who knows that the Hebrew slaves are Moses' brethren? Did Moses think of himself as an Egyptian? Granted, as an infant he was nursed by his birth mother, who may have conveyed to him a sense of his true identity. But he would not have been nursed for more than 2 or 3 years at most, probably not long enough for him to be told anything he would understand or remember. I would like to think that when the Bible refers to Moses' brethren and his kinsmen, it is speaking of his readiness to identify with the oppressed, the downtrodden, the marginalized members of society. Despite his privileged upbringing, when he sees a strong Egyptian beating a weak Hebrew, his instinct is to identify with the weak, a phenomenon we have often seen as men and women from comfortable backgrounds identify with the oppressed in their society rather than with the privileged. Moses not only feels sympathy and kinship for the slave who's being beaten, he intervenes to help him, striking down the Egyptian, killing him, and burying his body. Later in the Torah, Moses will proclaim the word of God, "Thou shalt not murder," not "thou shalt not kill," it's in Exodus chapter 20, verse 13, but will also proclaim, "Thou shalt not stand idly by when your neighbor's blood is shed," Leviticus chapter 19, verse 16. From the very first words describing Moses as an adult, we come to see him as a man who sides with the oppressed and who unhesitatingly takes action to correct an injustice. The next day, Moses sees 2 Hebrews fighting, or more likely one Hebrew man beating up a weaker, more vulnerable neighbor. The biblical text refers to one of the combatants as the offender, the one who was doing wrong. Moses challenges the aggressor, "Why do you strike your fellow?" The man responds, "Who made you a ruler over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" We find that in Exodus chapter 2, verses 13 and 14. Moses realizes his deed of the previous day is known and that he is a wanted man. He flees Egypt and escapes into the desert of Midian. There he comes to the rescue of the daughters of the Midianite high priest Jethro, who are being harassed by shepherds. Jethro takes Moses into his home and gives him his daughter, Zipporah, as his wife. The brief incident of the quarreling Hebrews sounds 2 themes that will continue to shape Moses' life. The first is the pattern of Moses being threatened by men and saved by women. Pharaoh seeks his death, along with that of all the Israelite male babies. Pharaoh's daughter, aided by Moses' sister and mother, rescue him, even as the midwives rescued other Israelite babies. The Egyptian authorities seek to punish him for killing the taskmaster. Zipporah prevails on her father to bring him into their home and becomes his wife. There is even a bizarre incident which baffles the best of scholars. We find it in Exodus chapter 4, verses 24 to 26, in which God threatens to kill Moses. Was it a nightmare, a sudden illness,